The eviction notice and the geological survey report arrived on the same morning in Maria Santos's mailbox, one declaring her inherited land worthless desert scrub, the other about to reveal that millions of dollars in diamonds lay buried beneath her feet. The cruel irony of timing would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. At 32, raising her 8-year-old daughter Sofia alone after her husband Carlos died in a construction accident, Maria had become an expert at juggling impossible situations. With grace she didn't feel, and strength she had to manufacture daily. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from today. And if this story of perseverance against impossible odds resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another story that'll blow your mind about ordinary people discovering extraordinary things. The morning had started like any other in the small desert town of Esperanza, Arizona, population 3,147, and shrinking every year as the copper mines played out, and young people fled to Phoenix or Tucson for opportunities that didn't exist in the high desert. Maria's alarm had gone off at 5:15 a.m., the same time it had for the past 3 years since she'd taken the job as a cashier at Morales Market, the only grocery store serving the scattered ranches and mobile home parks that dotted the landscape. Like forgotten punctuation marks, she'd tiptoed through their cramped, double-wide trailer, careful not to wake Sofia, who was sprawled across her narrow bed, clutching the stuffed elephant her father had won at the county fair just months before the accident. The trailer sat on 40 acres of what everyone called worthless land, inherited from Carlos's grandmother, who had lived there as a hermit for decades, subsisting on Social Security and the occasional sale of the strange rocks she collected from the property. Maria had never understood the old woman's fascination with rocks, but after Carlos died, she'd found herself grateful for the isolated homestead. It meant Sofia could play outside without traffic, could have a dog, could grow up with space around her instead of being crammed into some subsidized apartment complex in town. The land might be worthless, but it was theirs, and that mattered. When everything else felt uncertain, the grocery store job paid $12.50 an hour, which would have been laughable anywhere else, but in Esperanza qualified as decent work. Maria had tried to supplement their income with evening shifts at the truck stop diner out on Highway 191, but the late hours were brutal, and Sofia was already spending too much time alone. At 8, she was responsible beyond her years, heating up frozen dinners and doing homework at the kitchen table while Maria worked, but there were limits to what any child should have to handle. The trailer's mortgage was $847 a month, a payment that had seemed manageable when Carlos was bringing home $4,200 monthly from his construction crew. But construction workers' compensation death benefits were designed to help families transition, not sustain them indefinitely, and Maria's solo income left them perpetually behind. She'd been juggling minimum payments on credit cards, negotiating with utility companies, and performing the monthly ritual of deciding which bills could wait another few weeks. This morning's mail had contained the final notices she'd been dreading. The bank was foreclosing on the trailer and the land. She had 60 days to vacate or face eviction proceedings. The letter was coldly professional, citing months of missed payments and unsuccessful attempts to negotiate a modification. The numbers were stark. $8,400 in arrears, $2,100 in late fees, and the full balance of $156,000 now due immediately. Maria had stood in the kitchen, still holding the foreclosure notice, when Sofia emerged from her bedroom, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mommy, why are you crying?" she'd asked in the mixture of English and Spanish that had become their household language since Carlos died. "Just tired, mija," Maria had replied, quickly wiping her eyes and forcing a smile. "Go get dressed, I'll make your breakfast." Sofia had inherited her father's engineering mind and her mother's intuitive understanding of emotional undercurrents. At 8, she was already too perceptive for comfortable lies. "Are we going to lose the house?" she'd asked quietly, and Maria's heart had broken a little more. "We're going to figure it out," Maria had promised, though she had no idea how. The land was their only asset, but everyone knew it was worthless. 40 acres of desert scrub, caliche, hardpan, and scattered mesquite trees. No water rights, no mineral rights that anyone cared about, no development potential. The county assessor valued it at $180 per acre, making their total land worth about $7,200. Even if she could sell it immediately, it wouldn't cover what they owed on the trailer alone. After dropping Sofia at school, Maria had driven to work, through streets that seemed to mock her desperation. Esperanza had been built on mining wealth that had long since played out, leaving behind empty storefronts and houses with "for sale" signs that had been there so long they'd faded to illegible white rectangles. The few remaining businesses catered to the stubborn residents who refused to abandon their high desert home. Morales Market, Esperanza Cafe, Murphy's Hardware and Feed, and the Roadrunner Motel that mostly served truckers and the occasional lost. A tourist, the market was already busy when she arrived, full of ranch hands, picking up supplies, and retirees on fixed incomes, calculating every purchase. Maria had worked the register with mechanical efficiency, scanning items and making change, while her mind cycled through impossible mathematics, even working overtime, picking up extra shifts, selling everything they owned. She couldn't generate enough money to catch up on the mortgage. The Geographical Survey report had been waiting in her employee mailbox when she took her lunch break. It was addressed to Carlos Santos' estate and had been forwarded from their old address in town. Maria had almost thrown it away, assuming it was another piece of bureaucratic mail related to Carlos's death. But something about the official letterhead had made her open it. The report was from Southwest Geological Services, dated 3 months earlier. It detailed a comprehensive survey of their property that had apparently been commissioned by Carlos before his death. The technical language was mostly incomprehensible to Maria, full of terms like alluvial deposits, volcanic intrusions, and metamorphic processes. But the conclusion was clear. The land contained significant mineral deposits that warranted further investigation. Maria had read the report twice during her break, trying to understand what it meant. Carlos had never mentioned hiring geologists or paying for surveys. They'd been struggling financially even before his death, and geological surveys were expensive. Why would he have spent money they didn't have on testing worthless desert land? The key turn. Mystery deepened when she found a business card clipped to the back of the report. Dr. James Reeves, Senior Geologist, Southwest Geological Services. A handwritten note on the back read, "Mrs. Santos, please call me regarding your husband's commission. There are findings that require immediate discussion. Time sensitive." Maria had called the number from the store's office, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. Dr. Reeves had answered on the second ring, his voice carrying an urgency that made her stomach clench. "Mrs. Santos, I've been trying to reach you for months. Your husband commissioned a comprehensive geological survey of your property before his death. The results are extraordinary. We need to meet immediately. There are parties who would be very interested in acquiring your land, and you need to understand what you're dealing with before anyone else discovers what we've found." The conversation had lasted 20 minutes, with Dr. Reeves carefully explaining that Carlos had brought him samples of unusual rocks from their property, rocks that had shown enough promise to warrant a full survey. The results had revealed deposits of what appeared to be diamond-bearing kimberlite, a rare geological formation that could indicate the presence of significant diamond deposits. "Your husband was more perceptive than most people gave him credit for," Dr. Reeves had said. He noticed that the rocks his grandmother collected were unusual, different from typical desert minerals. He was right to be curious. Maria had felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. Carlos had been quietly working to secure their future, investigating possibilities that others had overlooked. It was exactly the kind of methodical, hopeful thinking that had made her fall in love with him. He'd always seen potential where others saw problems, opportunities where others saw obstacles. "How significant are these deposits?" she'd asked, afraid to hope, but unable to ignore the possibility. "Potentially very significant. We're talking about formations that could yield substantial diamond deposits. Conservative estimates suggest your property could be worth millions, possibly tens of millions, depending on the quality and quantity of recoverable stones." The words had seemed to echo in the cramped office behind Morales Market. Millions. The foreclosure notice in her purse suddenly felt like a cruel joke. She owned land worth millions, but she couldn't make an $847 trailer payment. "What happens now?" she'd asked. "We need to conduct more detailed testing, but that requires significant investment. Meanwhile, I need to warn you that geological surveys sometimes attract attention from parties who might try to acquire your property cheaply before you understand its true value. Your husband specifically asked me to ensure you were protected from such exploitation." Maria had thanked Dr. Reeves and promised to call him back after she'd had time to process the information. She'd returned to work in a daze, mechanically, scanning groceries while her mind raced through possibilities and complications. Sofia's future, which had seemed so limited an hour ago, suddenly appeared filled with potential. College, travel, opportunities that had seemed impossible on a grocery store cashier's salary. But there were immediate problems to solve. The foreclosure notice gave her 2 months, but complex geological surveys and mining operations took years to develop. She needed money now to save their home and keep their land, but the land's value was theoretical until someone actually extracted diamonds and sold them. The afternoon had crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every customer interaction felt surreal, ordinary conversations about produce prices and weather, while her mind processed the possibility that she was sitting on a fortune. When her shift finally ended, she'd driven home through the desert landscape she'd always taken for granted, seeing it with new eyes. The land that stretched around their trailer no longer looked worthless. Every rock formation, every geological work that had seemed merely decorative now appeared potentially valuable. The scattered stones that Carlos's grandmother had collected and left in coffee cans around the property suddenly seemed like clues to a treasure hunt that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Sofia had been waiting on the trailer's small porte when Maria arrived home, her backpack beside her, homework already completed. "How was work, Mummy?" she'd asked, and for the first time in months Maria had smiled genuinely. "Interesting, Mija, very interesting." That evening, after Sofia was asleep, Maria had sat at their small kitchen table with the foreclosure notice and the geological report spread before her. The contrast was stark. Immediate disaster and potential salvation, both printed on official letterhead, both demanding action she wasn't sure how to take. She'd called her sister Eleanor in Phoenix, the only family member with any business experience. Elena managed a real estate office and had always been the practical one, the sister who'd gone to college and built a career while Maria had fallen in love young and started a family. "Elena, I need your advice about something complicated," Maria had begun, then spent an hour explaining the geological survey, the diamond deposits, and the foreclosure notice. Elena's response had been characteristically direct. "You need a lawyer?" "Maria, you need someone who understands mineral rights and can protect you from being taken advantage of. This is too big for you to handle alone." "I can't afford a lawyer," Maria had protested. "I can't even afford my mortgage payment." "You can't afford not to have a lawyer," Elena had countered. If this geological report is accurate, you're sitting on generational wealth. But you need professional help to realize that value without losing everything in the process. The call had ended with Elena promising to research attorneys who specialized in mineral rights and mining law. Maria had gone to bed that night with her mind spinning, alternating between hope and terror. The Geological Survey represented everything she'd dreamed of for Sofia's future, but navigating the complex world of mineral extraction and property rights felt overwhelming. She'd lain awake until nearly midnight, listening to the desert wind against the trailer's metal siding, thinking about Carlos and his grandmother and the strange rocks that had seemed so insignificant until today. Somewhere beneath their modest home lay formations that had taken millions of years to create, compressed carbon that had become diamonds under unimaginable pressure and heat. The irony wasn't lost on her. She felt compressed by pressure herself, the weight of single parenthood and financial desperation creating something harder and more valuable than she'd imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since Carlos died, Maria felt like she might have the tools to face them. The last thing she'd thought before falling asleep was how proud Carlos would have been to know that his quiet investigation had uncovered something extraordinary, that his methodical curiosity had potentially secured their daughter's future. He'd always believed in looking deeper, in questioning assumptions, in finding value where others saw only problems. Now it was up to Maria to honor that legacy and transform potential into reality, to navigate the treacherous path between hope and exploitation, between protecting their land and realizing its value. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the margin for error was non-existent, but somewhere beneath the desert floor lay the answer to every prayer she'd whispered since Carlos died. If only she could figure out how to reach it. The next morning arrived, with the kind of brilliant desert sunrise that made the hard-scrabble landscape look almost beautiful, painting the mesquite and palo verde trees in shades of gold that would disappear as soon as the sun climbed higher. Maria had slept fitfully, waking every few hours with fragments of dreams about glittering stones and foreclosure papers, her subconscious trying to process the impossible contradiction between potential wealth and immediate poverty. Sofia was already awake when Maria checked on her, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a book about rocks and minerals that she'd checked out from the school library months ago. It was one of those strange coincidences that seemed meaningful only in retrospect, her daughter's casual interest in geology suddenly appearing prophetic. "Mummy, did you know that diamonds are just carbon that got squeezed really, really hard?" Sofia asked, looking up from a page filled with colorful photographs of gemstones. "Like the same stuff that's in pencils, but under so much pressure, it becomes the hardest thing in the world?" Maria felt a chill of recognition. "Where did you learn that, Misha?" "From this book, and Ms. Rodriguez taught us about it in science class. She said Arizona has lots of different rocks because of volcanoes and stuff that happened millions of years ago." Sofia turned the page to reveal a diagram of underground geological formations. "Look, it shows how diamonds get made deep in the earth and then come up in these things called pipes." The conversation felt surreal. Her 8-year-old daughter, casually explaining concepts that had seemed impossibly complex in yesterday's geological report. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, studying the illustrations that suddenly seemed relevant to their lives in ways she was still struggling to comprehend. "Sofia, do you remember Bisabuela's rock collection?" Maria asked, referring to Carlos's grandmother, who had died when Sofia was 6, but had left a lasting impression as the eccentric old woman who lived surrounded by coffee cans full of interesting stones. "The pretty ones she kept in the kitchen? The ones that looked different from regular rocks?" Sofia's eyes brightened with memory. She used to let me help her sort them. She said they were special, but I never knew why. Maria felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Carlos's grandmother hadn't been a crazy old woman hoarding worthless rocks. She'd been collecting geological specimens from their property for decades, recognizing something unusual about the mineral formations even without formal training. Her intuitive understanding had been dismissed by everyone, including Maria herself, as the harmless obsession of an isolated elderly woman. After dropping Sofia at school, Maria drove not to work, but to the address Dr. Reeves had given her for Southwest Geological Services. She'd called in sick to the market, burning one of her precious few sick days. But this meeting felt more important than any shift she'd ever worked. The Geological Survey Office was located in a modest strip mall in the older part of town, wedged between a tax preparation service and a pawn shop. Hardly the glamorous headquarters she'd imagined for a company that dealt in potential millions. Dr. James Reeves turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his early 60s, with weathered hands and the kind of deep tan that came from decades of fieldwork under the desert sun. His office was cramped but organized, with rock samples covering every available surface and wall-mounted maps showing the geological features of Arizona and neighboring states. Everything about the space suggested competence without pretension, scientific rigor applied to practical problems. "Mrs. Santos, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit in a chair across from his desk. "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for your loss. Your husband was a remarkable man, more observant than most people I work with professionally." Maria felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied mentions of Carlos, but she forced herself to focus on the present crisis. "Dr. Reeves, I need to understand what we're dealing with. The foreclosure notice gives me 60 days, and I don't know how to turn theoretical diamonds into actual money." Dr. Reeves nodded soberly. "That's exactly what your husband was worried about. He specifically asked me to make sure you understood both the potential and the pitfalls of what we've discovered on your property." He pulled out a file folder thick, with documents and photographs, spreading them across his desk in an organized array. The first set of photos showed rock samples that Maria recognized as similar to the stones in Carlos's grandmother's collection, but these were labeled with technical specifications and mineral content analyses. "Your property sits on what we call a kimberlite intrusion," Dr. Reeves explained, pointing to a geological map marked with various symbols and notations. Kimberlite is a type of volcanic rock that forms deep in the Earth's mantle and sometimes brings diamonds to the surface during eruptions. These formations are extremely rare, and most of them have been heavily mined or are located in places where extraction isn't economically viable. He showed her core samples from test drilling that had been conducted on their property, revealing the distinctive blue-gray rock that characterized diamond-bearing formations. "What makes your situation unusual is that this kimberlite pipe appears to be relatively shallow and easily accessible. Your husband's grandmother was essentially sitting on top of one of the most promising diamond deposits I've seen in 20 years of geological work." Maria studied the samples, trying to reconcile these unremarkable-looking rocks with the extraordinary claims being made about their value. "How do you know there are actually diamonds in there? These just look like regular rocks to me." Dr. Reeves smiled and reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a small glass vial containing what appeared to be several tiny, clear stones. "Because we've already found some." Maria's breath caught as she realized she was looking at diamonds, extracted from her own property, rough and uncut, but unmistakably genuine. The largest was about the size of a pencil eraser, with others ranging down to barely visible fragments. Even unpolished, they caught the office's fluorescent light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. "These came from surface sampling and shallow test pits," Dr. Reeves continued. The deeper deposits are likely to yield larger and higher quality stones. Conservative estimates suggest your 40 acres could produce diamonds worth anywhere from $5 to $50 million, depending on the depth and concentration of the deposits. The numbers felt abstract, too large for Maria's brain to process meaningfully. She was accustomed to thinking in terms of hundreds and thousands, budgeting groceries and utility bills, not geological formations worth tens of millions. What would it take to actually mine these diamonds and sell them? That's where it gets complicated, Dr. Reeves admitted. Diamond mining requires significant capital investment, environmental permits, specialized equipment, and expertise in extraction and processing. We're talking about at least $2 to $3 million in startup costs before you'd see any return on investment. Maria felt her hopes deflating. So I own millions of dollars worth of diamonds that I can't afford to dig up? Not necessarily. There are several potential paths forward, but each comes with its own risks and benefits. Dr. Reeves pulled out another set of documents. You could sell the mineral rights to an established mining company, which would give you immediate capital, but only a fraction of the total value. You could form a partnership with investors who would fund the extraction in exchange for a percentage of the profits. Or you could take out loans against the proven mineral reserves to fund the operation yourself. Each option carried complications that made Maria's head spin. Selling the mineral rights would solve her immediate financial crisis, but would mean giving up most of the long-term wealth. Partnership arrangements could be lucrative, but required trusting outsiders with her family's future. Loans against mineral reserves were possible but risky, requiring her to bet everything on the success of the mining operation. Your husband anticipated these challenges, Dr. Reeves said. He asked me to prepare recommendations for protecting your interests regardless of which path you chose. He handed her a manila envelope that Carlos had apparently left with his geological survey commission. Inside, Maria found a letter in her husband's familiar handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the pages and began to read. My beloved Maria, the letter began, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and Dr. Reeves has shared the results of our geological survey. I want you to know that everything I did was to secure Sofia's future and give you both the opportunities that my family never had. The letter went on to explain Carlos's growing suspicions about his grandmother's rock collection, his decision to have the property professionally surveyed, and his hopes for what the discovery might mean for their family. But more importantly, it contained specific instructions for protecting herself from exploitation and ensuring that Sofia would benefit from whatever wealth lay beneath their desert home. Do not trust anyone who approaches you with offers to buy the land cheaply, Carlos had written. Do not sign any documents without having them reviewed by an attorney who specializes in mineral rights. And remember that this discovery belongs to our daughter's generation, not just ours. Make decisions that will benefit Sofia throughout her life, not just solve our immediate problems. Maria wiped away tears that had started flowing as she read her husband's words. Even in death, he was trying to protect and provide for his family, his engineering mind working through problems and solutions with the same methodical care he'd brought to every aspect of their life together. Mrs. Santos, Dr. Reeves said gently, there's something else you need to know. Word has already started to spread about the geological survey results. I've had 3 different parties contact me this week asking about your property. 2 were legitimate mining companies, but the third was less straightforward in their intentions. Maria looked up from Carlos's letter, alarmed. What do you mean? There are individuals and companies who specialize in acquiring mineral rights from property owners who don't fully understand the value of what they own. They make offers that seem generous to people facing financial difficulties, but represent only a tiny fraction of the actual worth of the deposits. Dr. Reeves showed her examples of contracts that such companies typically offered, documents filled with legal language designed to obscure the fact that property owners would be giving up millions in potential wealth for immediate payments of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. Your husband was very concerned about this possibility. He specifically asked me to help you identify and avoid these predatory offers. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Reeves's phone rang. He answered with his professional greeting, then listened with growing concern. I see. Yes, I understand. No, I will not provide information about ongoing surveys without written authorization from the property owner. He hung up and turned to Maria with a troubled expression. That was someone claiming to represent Apex Resource Development, asking for details about our work on your property. They said they were interested in making you an immediate offer for mineral rights. Maria felt a chill of foreboding. Is that one of the legitimate companies you mentioned? No. Apex has a reputation for aggressive acquisition tactics and lowball offers. The fact that they're already circling suggests that information about your property's potential value is spreading faster than we'd hoped. The morning's revelations were overwhelming Maria's ability to process them rationally. She owned land worth millions, but she couldn't access that wealth without significant investment and expertise she didn't possess. Meanwhile, companies were already positioning themselves to take advantage of her desperate financial situation and limited understanding of the mineral rights industry. Dr. Reeves, I need practical advice. I have 58 days before I lose my home and my land. What do I do first? First, you need legal representation from someone who specializes in mineral rights law. I can recommend several attorneys who have experience protecting small property owners from exploitation. Second, you need to secure your property against unauthorized access. There have been cases where companies conduct their own geological surveys on private land without permission, then use that information to make lowball offers based on superior knowledge. He handed her a business card for Patricia Hernandez, an attorney who specialized in mineral rights and property law. Patricia has handled similar cases and understands both the legal complexities and the time pressures you're facing. She can help you evaluate options while protecting your long-term interests. Maria tucked the card into her purse alongside. The foreclosure notice, 2 pieces of paper that represented opposite poles of her current crisis. What about the immediate financial pressure? Even if this property is worth millions, I still need to make mortgage payments while we figure out how to access that value. There are emergency financing options available for property owners with proven mineral deposits. Banks and investment firms will sometimes provide bridge loans secured by geological surveys and mineral assessments. The terms aren't always favorable, but they can provide the breathing room you need to make better long-term decisions. Dr. Reeves spent another hour walking Maria through the technical aspects of the geological survey, explaining the quality indicators that suggested their diamond deposits were particularly valuable, and the environmental factors that would make extraction relatively straightforward compared to other sites he'd evaluated. As she prepared to leave, he handed her a sealed envelope containing copies of all survey documents, core samples, and mineral analysis reports. These belong to you now. Guard them carefully and don't share them with anyone until you have proper legal representation. Your husband paid for this information to protect your family's future. Make sure that investment wasn't wasted. The drive home felt different than any trip Maria had ever taken across the familiar desert landscape. Every mile marker and landmark now carried new significance, representing not just the geography of her daily life, but the boundaries of potential wealth that could transform everything for Sofia's generation and beyond. She stopped at Sofia's. a school to have lunch with her daughter, a tradition they'd maintained since Carlos's death as a way of staying connected despite Maria's demanding work schedule. Today, sitting in the cafeteria surrounded by the normal chaos of elementary school lunchtime, the routine felt precious and fragile, a reminder of what mattered most, regardless of whatever geological treasures lay beneath their property. "How was your morning, Mommy?" Sofia asked between bites of her peanut butter sandwich. "Educational," Maria replied, watching her daughter's intelligent eyes and thinking about the future that might now be possible. College, graduate school, opportunities that had seemed impossible just days ago. "Sofia, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want?" Sofia considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I want you to not worry so much about money, and I want to be a scientist like Ms. Rodriguez, maybe study rocks and stuff. And I want Papi to be proud of us." Maria felt her eyes fill with tears for the second time that day. "Papi is proud of us, Mija, and he's still taking care of us, even though he's not here anymore." The afternoon held more meetings, phone calls, and decisions that would shape their family's future in ways Maria was still learning to comprehend. But for now, sitting in an elementary school cafeteria with her remarkable daughter, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced since Carlos died: genuine hope for tomorrow. Maria returned home that afternoon to find a white pickup truck parked in front of their trailer, its corporate logo gleaming in the harsh desert sun. Apex Resource Development, unlocking Arizona's potential. A man in khakis and a polo shirt was walking the perimeter of their property, occasionally stopping to examine rock formations and take photographs with a professional-grade camera. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, despite having no permission to be on their land. "Excuse me," Maria called out as she got out of her car, her voice carrying more authority than she felt. "This is private property. Can I help you?" The man looked up with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of aggressive friendliness that immediately put Maria on guard. "Mrs. Santos, I presume. I'm Rick Brennan from Apex Resource Development. I was hoping we could have a conversation about your property." Maria felt a chill of recognition. This was the company Dr. Reeves had warned her about, the one that had already called asking for information about their geological survey. The fact that a representative was now trespassing on her land, photographing rock formations without permission, suggested an aggressiveness that bordered on predatory. "You're trespassing, Mr. Brennan. I need you to leave immediately." Now, let's not start off on the wrong foot," Brennan said, his tone becoming slightly less friendly. "I'm here to discuss a business opportunity that could solve some problems. I understand you're facing. Foreclosure is never pleasant, especially for a single mother." The mention of her foreclosure notice sent ice through Maria's veins. How did this man know about her financial situation? The notice had arrived just yesterday, and she hadn't discussed it with anyone except Elena and Dr. Reeves. Either Apex had sources at the bank, or they were monitoring property records and targeting distressed homeowners systematically. "My financial situation is none of your business," Maria said firmly. "You're trespassing, and I want you to leave now." Brennan held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, but he made no move toward his truck. "Mrs. Santos, I understand you're protective of your property. That's admirable. But I also understand you're facing some serious financial pressure, and I'm here to offer a solution." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 cash for the mineral rights to your property. That's enough to catch up on your mortgage payments and give you breathing room to figure out your next steps." Maria stared at the contract, her mind racing. $50,000 would indeed solve her immediate crisis, would let her keep their home and give Sofia stability. But Dr. Reeves had warned her about exactly this scenario. companies offering amounts that seemed generous to desperate property owners but represented tiny fractions of actual mineral wealth. "How do you know about mineral rights on my property?" she asked carefully. Brennan's smile became more genuine, as if he was pleased by her question. "Mrs. Santos, we're in the business of identifying underutilized mineral resources throughout Arizona. Your property has certain geological characteristics that suggest potential value, rather than let you struggle with development costs and regulatory complexities. We're offering to take that burden off your hands for a fair price." Everything about his approach felt wrong. The unauthorized presence on her property, the knowledge of her financial situation, the pressure to make an immediate decision, the characterization of $50,000 as fair for deposits that could be worth millions. Carlos's letter had specifically warned her about exactly this scenario. "I'm not interested," Maria said flatly. "And I need you to leave my property immediately, or I'll call the sheriff." Brennan's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Santos, I think you're making a mistake. Mineral extraction is a complex, expensive, risky business. Most small property owners who try to develop deposits on their own end up losing everything. We're offering you certainty, immediate cash that can solve your problems today." $50,000 isn't going to solve anything long-term, Maria replied, surprised by her own firmness. "And you still haven't explained how you know about mineral deposits on my land. It's public information that your property sits on geological formations associated with mineral deposits," Brennan said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Anyone can file mineral rights claims in this area. We're simply offering to purchase existing rights before going through the legal process of establishing new claims." Maria felt a spike of panic. Could Apex really file claims on her mineral rights? Dr. Reeves hadn't mentioned anything about other parties being able to establish competing claims on her property. The legal complexities of mineral rights were beyond her understanding, and Brennan was clearly counting on that ignorance. "I need to consult with my attorney before making any decisions about mineral rights," she said, trying to buy time while projecting confidence she didn't feel. Brennan pulled a pen from his pocket and held it out along with the contract. "Mrs. Santos, attorneys cost money you don't have, and legal consultations take time you don't have. Your foreclosure notice gives you what? 58 days? By the time you pay legal fees and navigate the bureaucracy of mineral development, you could lose everything." The pressure tactics were becoming more obvious, designed to create urgency and prevent careful consideration of the decision. Maria thought about Carlos's methodical approach to problems, his insistence on understanding all variables before making important choices. He would never have signed a document presented by a trespasser using high-pressure sales techniques. "Mr. Brennan, you need to leave immediately. I'm not signing anything today, and your presence on my property without permission is illegal." For a moment, Brennan's mask of friendly professionalism slipped entirely. "You're making a serious mistake. Mrs. Santos, this is a generous offer for worthless desert land. If you think you're sitting on some kind of treasure, you're going to be very disappointed when reality sets in." He walked back to his truck, but before getting in, he turned back to Maria. "I'll leave my card on your porch. When you realize you can't afford to develop whatever you think you've found, call me. The offer stands for 48 hours, then we move on to other opportunities." As Brennan drove away, Maria noticed he took several more photographs through his truck window, documenting rock formations and landscape features. The violation of her privacy and property rights felt like a physical assault, a preview of the pressures she could expect as word spread about the diamond deposits. She found Brennan's business card tucked under her front door, along with the mineral rights contract he'd tried to pressure her into signing. The document was filled with legal language that obscured the true implications of the agreement. But even Maria's limited understanding revealed how one-sided the terms were. Apex would gain exclusive rights to all minerals on the property in perpetuity, while she would receive only the initial $50,000 payment, regardless of how valuable the deposits proved to be. Sofia's school bus arrived 30 minutes later, and Maria watched her daughter walk up the dirt path to their trailer with the mixed emotions that had become constant since discovering the diamond deposits. Sofia deserved the opportunities that mineral wealth could provide, but she also deserved protection from the dangers that came with such discoveries. "Mammy, whose truck was that?" Sofia asked, having apparently seen Brennan's vehicle from the bus window. "Someone trying to buy our land," Maria replied carefully. "Someone we're not going to do business with." Sofia studied her mother's face with the perceptiveness that constantly amazed Maria. "Was he one of the bad guys Papi warned you about in his letter?" Maria was startled. "How do you know about Papi's letter?" "I saw you reading it this morning before school. You were crying the same way you cry when you miss him." Sofia sat down on the porch steps beside her mother. "Are we in some kind of trouble because of the rocks?" The question forced Maria to confront how much she should share with her 8-year-old daughter about their situation. Sofia was intelligent and observant, already aware that their family faced financial pressures, but the complexities of mineral rights and corporate exploitation seemed too adult for a child to process. "We're not in trouble, Misha, but we need to be careful about who we trust. Papi discovered that our land might be worth more than we thought, but that means some people might try to trick us into giving it away for much less than it's worth." Sofia nodded seriously, like the stories about people trading valuable things for cheap stuff because they don't know better. "Exactly like that, which is why we're going to talk to lawyers and experts who can help us make smart decisions." That evening, after Sofia was asleep, Maria called Patricia Hernandez, the mineral rights attorney Dr. Reeves had recommended. Conversation lasted over an hour and covered legal complexities that made Maria's head spin, but the attorney's core message was clear. Maria needed immediate legal protection to prevent companies like Apex from taking advantage of her situation. "Mrs. Santos," Hernandez explained, "what you're describing is a classic predatory acquisition scenario. Companies identify property owners with valuable mineral deposits who are facing financial distress, then use high-pressure tactics to acquire rights for a fraction of their true value." Hernandez outlined the legal steps necessary to protect Maria's interests: filing proper mineral rights claims, establishing legal boundaries around their property, creating documentation that would prevent unauthorized surveys or samples, and developing a strategic plan for either developing the deposits or selling rights at fair market value. The good news is that your husband's geological survey gives you a strong legal foundation for establishing the value of your mineral rights. The challenging news is that developing those rights into actual income will require significant time and investment. "What about bridge financing?" Maria asked, remembering Dr. Reeves's suggestion. "Is it possible to get loans secured by proven mineral deposits?" "It's possible, but the terms are usually expensive and the risks are significant. You'd be betting your property on the success of mining operations that could face environmental challenges, equipment failures, market fluctuations, or regulatory complications." Hernandez recommended a more conservative approach, establishing a legal framework to protect the mineral rights while exploring partnership opportunities with established mining companies that could provide expertise and capital in exchange for a percentage of profits rather than outright purchase of rights. This approach takes longer but preserves your family's long-term interests while providing more sustainable income than a one-time buyout. The call ended with an agreement to meet the following day to begin the legal process of protecting Maria's mineral rights. The attorney's fees would be expensive, money Maria didn't have, but Hernandez agreed to work on a contingency basis, taking payment from eventual profits rather than requiring upfront fees. As Maria prepared for bed, she reviewed the day's events with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The encounter with Brennan had revealed how quickly and aggressively outside parties would move to exploit her situation, but the conversations with Dr. Reeves and Hernandez had also shown that she had resources and options for protecting her family's interests. She walked outside to check on their property one more time before bed, using a flashlight to examine the areas where Brennan had been photographing rock formations. In the harsh circle of LED light, the scattered stones that had seemed insignificant for decades now appeared precious and vulnerable. Treasures that needed protection from those who would steal them through legal manipulation rather than honest purchase. The desert night was quiet except for the distant howl of coyotes and the whisper of wind through mesquite branches. Somewhere beneath her feet lay compressed carbon that had been transformed by millions of years of pressure into diamonds, geological processes that had created wealth beyond her imagination. But accessing that wealth would require navigating human complexities far more treacherous than any geological formation. Maria thought about Carlos's grandmother, who had spent decades collecting unusual rocks from this property, intuitively recognizing their value even without formal geological training. The old woman had died peacefully in her sleep 3 years ago, never knowing that her rock collection represented clues to a fortune that could transform her great-granddaughter's future. Back inside the trailer, Maria sat at the kitchen table, with Carlos's letter spread before her, reading his words again by lamplight. His engineering background had given him the systematic thinking necessary to investigate the property's potential and plan for protecting his family's interests. Now it was up to Maria to honor his foresight and ensure that Sofia benefited from discoveries that had been decades in the making. The foreclosure notice still sat beside Carlos's letter, a reminder that time was running short. 56 days remained before they could lose everything. But Maria now understood that everything included far more than she'd imagined possible. The stakes had been raised beyond her comprehension, but so had the potential rewards for making the right decisions. Tomorrow would bring meetings with attorneys and more complex negotiations than she'd ever imagined facing. But tonight, sitting in the modest trailer that sat atop millions of dollars in diamond deposits, Maria allowed herself to feel something she hadn't experienced since Carlos died: confidence that she could protect and provide for her daughter's future, regardless of what challenges lay ahead. The accidental discovery had become intentional action, and Maria Santos was no longer just a struggling single mother hoping to survive. She was the guardian of generational wealth, the protector of her family's future, and increasingly, a woman who understood that the most valuable diamonds were formed under the greatest pressure. The attorney's office in Tucson was everything Maria had expected from someone who specialized in high-stakes mineral rights cases: leather-bound law books lining mahogany shelves, framed certificates proclaiming expertise in mining law and environmental regulations, and a conference table large enough to accommodate the complex negotiations that would determine her family's future. Patricia Hernandez was a compact woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd spent decades fighting battles where millions of dollars hung in the balance. "Mrs. Santos, before we discuss strategy, I need you to understand the scope of what we're dealing with," Hernandez began, spreading geological surveys and legal documents across the polished table surface. "Based on Dr. Reeves's preliminary assessment, your property could yield diamond deposits worth anywhere from $10 to $60 million, depending on extraction efficiency and market conditions." The numbers still felt abstract to Maria, amounts so large they seemed to belong to someone else's life rather than her own. She was accustomed to measuring wealth in hundreds of dollars, not tens of millions, and the psychological adjustment felt overwhelming even as she recognized the extraordinary opportunity. However, Hernandez continued, transforming geological potential into actual wealth requires navigating regulatory frameworks, environmental assessments, extraction technologies, and market dynamics that most property owners are completely unprepared to handle. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Apex Resource Development and placed it in front of Maria. This company has acquired mineral rights from over 200 small property owners across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico during the past 5 years. In every case, they've paid between $20,000 and $100,000 for rights that proved to be worth millions. Maria opened the folder to find photocopied contracts, property assessments, and newspaper articles documenting Apex's acquisition strategies. The pattern was consistent and disturbing. Identify properties with valuable mineral deposits, target owners facing financial distress, use high-pressure tactics to force quick decisions, and acquire rights for fractions of their true value. This family in Kingman, Hernandez said, pointing to one case study, sold mineral rights to Apex for $75,000 to avoid foreclosure. Those rights have since yielded over $8 million in copper and silver extraction. This rancher near Flagstaff took $60,000 to pay medical bills. Apex has extracted $4 million in rare earth minerals from his property over the past 3 years. The documentation was infuriating and terrifying in equal measure. Maria could see how easily she might have fallen into the same trap, how desperate. Financial circumstances could make even exploitative offers seem like salvation. If she hadn't received Carlos's geological survey and Dr. Reeves's warnings, she might already have signed away her family's future for enough money to catch up on mortgage payments. What's particularly concerning about your situation, Hernandez continued, is how quickly Apex identified your property as a target. Their representative showed up within 24 hours of Dr. Reeves completing his survey report. That suggests they have sources monitoring geological surveys, property records, and financial filings to identify vulnerable property owners. Maria felt a chill of violation. The idea that companies were systematically tracking families in financial distress, waiting for opportunities to exploit their desperation, felt like a form of legal predation that should be criminal rather than merely unethical. How do we protect ourselves from this kind of manipulation? She asked. First, we file immediate legal claims establishing your exclusive mineral rights and preventing unauthorized access to your property. Second, we create a protective legal framework that prevents any agreements from being finalized without comprehensive, independent assessments. Third, we develop a strategic plan that maximizes long-term value rather than solving short-term financial pressure. Hernandez outlined a legal strategy that would take several weeks to implement, but would provide comprehensive protection against exploitation. The process would be expensive, requiring upfront legal fees that Maria couldn't afford, but the attorney agreed to work on contingency, taking payment from eventual mineral extraction profits. Mrs. Santos, I need to be direct about something else. Word about significant mineral discoveries spreads quickly through industry networks, and your property is going to attract attention from multiple parties with varying levels of legitimate interest. Some will be reputable mining companies offering fair partnerships. Others will be speculators, con artists, and companies like Apex looking to acquire valuable rights cheaply. As if summoned by their conversation, Hernandez's secretary knocked on the conference room door. Ms. Hernandez, there are 3 gentlemen in the lobby asking to speak with Mrs. Santos. They say they represent different mining companies and have urgent business propositions. Maria and Hernandez exchanged glances. The speed with which outside parties were mobilizing confirmed their worst fears about how quickly information was spreading through networks of companies that specialized in acquiring mineral rights. Tell them Mrs. Santos is in meetings, and "Cannot be disturbed," Hernandez instructed. "And please get their business cards and contact information for our files." The interruption reinforced the urgency of their situation. Maria was no longer just a struggling single mother trying to avoid foreclosure. She had become a target for multiple parties who saw her financial desperation as an opportunity for their own enrichment. "This is exactly what your husband was trying to protect you from," Hernandez observed, reviewing Carlos's letter and the specific warnings he'd included about pressure tactics and exploitative contracts. He understood that discovering valuable mineral deposits would make you vulnerable to sophisticated manipulation. They spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive legal strategy. Hernandez would file mineral rights claims that established Maria's exclusive ownership of subsurface deposits while creating legal barriers against unauthorized surveys or extraction attempts. She would also begin vetting potential partnership opportunities with established mining companies that had track records of fair dealing with small property owners. "The key is maintaining control while accessing expertise and capital," Hernandez explained. "Rather than selling your rights for a one-time payment, we'll structure partnerships that give you ongoing revenue from extraction operations while preserving ownership of the underlying assets." As their meeting concluded, Maria felt simultaneously more hopeful and more anxious than when she'd arrived. The legal protections Hernandez proposed would safeguard her family's interests, but the complexity of the mineral rights industry was far beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first read Dr. Reeves's geological survey. The drive back to Esperanza took her through desert landscape that now seemed charged with hidden significance. Every rock formation and geological feature represented potential wealth or potential vulnerability, depending on how skillfully she navigated the treacherous intersection of mineral extraction and property law. She stopped at Sofia's school to pick her up early, wanting to spend the afternoon together while processing the morning's revelations. Her daughter was waiting in the principal's office with a book about gemstones, having apparently expanded her casual interest in geology into systematic research. "Mummy, did you know that the biggest diamonds come from really deep underground, sometimes hundreds of miles down?" Sofia asked as they walked to the car. "And it takes special volcanic explosions to bring them up to where people can find them?" Maria marveled again at the coincidences that seemed to permeate their situation. Her daughter's spontaneous interest in geological processes, Carlos's grandmother's intuitive rock collecting, her husband's methodical investigation of their properties' potential, all suggesting forces beyond random chance working to reveal long-hidden treasures. "Sofia, what would you think about having enough money to go to any college you wanted, to study anything that interested you?" Sofia considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "Would that mean you wouldn't have to work so much? Would you not be worried about paying bills all the time?" The answer revealed how perceptive her daughter was about their financial struggles. How much stress had been visible despite Maria's efforts to shield Sofia from adult concerns. "It might mean exactly that, Mija. It might mean a lot of things could be different. Would we still live in our house? I like our house." The question touched Maria's heart. Their modest trailer represented security and continuity to Sofia, the only stable home she'd known since Carlos died. Whatever changes came from the mineral discovery, Maria wanted to ensure that Sofia's sense of security remained intact. "We'll always have our home, and we'll always be together. That's what matters most, regardless of what else changes." That afternoon, while Sofia did homework at the kitchen table, Maria called Elena to update her sister on the morning's developments. Elena's response was characteristically practical and slightly alarmed. "Maria, you're dealing with forces way beyond your experience level. Mining companies, mineral rights law, geological surveys. This is specialized stuff that requires professional expertise you don't have. That's why I hired Patricia Hernandez. She specializes in exactly these kinds of situations. But even with good legal representation, you're still a single mother with an 8th-grade education going up against companies, with teams of lawyers and decades of experience exploiting people in exactly your situation. Elena's bluntness stung, but Maria recognized the truth in her sister's concerns. The mineral rights industry was complex and predatory, designed to benefit sophisticated players at the expense of individual property owners who lacked specialized knowledge. Eleanor, what choice do I have? I can't ignore what we've discovered, and I can't let companies like Apex steal our future because I'm intimidated by complexity. I'm not saying you should ignore it. I'm saying you need more help than just a lawyer. You need people who understand the mining industry, who can evaluate partnership opportunities and protect you from being manipulated. Elena's suggestion led to an evening of research that opened Maria's eyes to the broader context of mineral extraction in the American Southwest. Online forums were filled with horror stories from property owners who'd lost fortunes to exploitative contracts, but also success stories from families who'd navigated the industry successfully with proper guidance and legal protection. One case, a study particularly caught Maria's attention. A ranching family in Colorado who'd discovered gold deposits on their property and spent 3 years developing a partnership with a reputable mining company. Rather than selling their mineral rights for immediate cash, they'd negotiated a deal that gave them ongoing royalties from extraction operations while maintaining ownership of their land and control over environmental impact. The Colorado family's approach required patience and expertise, but had ultimately yielded sustained income that supported multiple generations rather than a one-time windfall that could be quickly spent. Their success story provided a model for how small property owners could benefit from mineral discoveries without being exploited by larger, more sophisticated parties. As Maria read about their experience, she began to understand that the diamond deposits beneath her property represented more than just potential wealth. They represented an opportunity to break the cycle of financial instability that had defined her adult life, to create lasting security for Sofia's generation and beyond. But accessing that opportunity would require her to become more knowledgeable, more strategic, and more resilient than she'd ever imagined necessary. The stakes were higher than she'd understood, but so were the potential rewards for making intelligent decisions. The evening brought another unwelcome surprise. Maria was preparing dinner when she noticed headlights approaching their trailer, moving slowly as if the driver was searching for something. The vehicle stopped at the end of their dirt driveway, and 2 men got out, walking toward their property with flashlights. Maria turned off the kitchen lights and watched through the window as the men examined rock formations near the boundary of their land, taking photographs and collecting samples. They moved with the efficiency of professionals, but their presence at dusk without permission felt threatening rather than legitimate. "Sofia, go to your room and stay there until I tell you it's safe to come out," Maria said quietly. She waited until the men returned to their vehicle before stepping onto the porch with her phone in hand, ready to call 911 if necessary. The men drove away without attempting to approach the trailer, but their unauthorized presence on her property felt like another violation, another indication that discovery of the diamond deposits had made her family vulnerable to intrusion and exploitation. The incident reinforced everything Patricia Hernandez had warned her about regarding the aggressive tactics used by companies seeking to acquire mineral rights. These weren't legitimate business representatives making appointments and following proper procedures. These were people operating in legal gray areas, using intimidation and trespass to gather information they could use for their own advantage. Maria spent a restless night checking locks and watching for headlights, her phone charged and ready to call for help if the trespassers returned. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now seemed dangerous, their remote location making them vulnerable to parties who operated outside normal business ethics. The next morning brought validation of her concerns in the form of a certified letter from Apex Resource Development. The document claimed that their representatives had conducted authorized geological surveys on her property and were prepared to increase their offer for mineral rights to $75,000, conditional on immediate acceptance. Letter was filled with legal language suggesting that Maria's window for negotiating was limited, that other parties were preparing to file competing claims on her mineral deposits, and that Apex's offer represented her best opportunity for avoiding prolonged legal battles that could cost more than the deposits were worth. Every aspect of the communication was designed to create pressure and prevent careful consideration. The increased offer was presented as generous rather than exploitative. The time pressure was manufactured to prevent consultation with legal experts, and the threats about competing claims were intended to frighten Maria into making quick decisions. But Carlos's letter had prepared her for exactly this scenario, and Patricia Hernandez had explained how these tactics worked. Rather than feeling pressured, Maria felt angry about the systematic attempt to manipulate her desperation and exploit her family's situation. She called Hernandez immediately to report both the unauthorized property survey and the pressure tactics. In Apex's letter, the attorney's response was swift and decisive. Mrs. Santos, we're filing for an immediate restraining order against Apex and any other parties conducting unauthorized activities on your property. We're also going to document these harassment tactics for potential legal action. The morning's events had transformed Maria's understanding of her situation. She was no longer just a property owner with valuable mineral deposits. She was engaged in active conflict with parties who would use any legal or quasi-legal means to acquire those deposits for their own enrichment. The accidental discovery had become a battle for her family's future, and Maria was beginning to understand that winning would require not just legal expertise and geological knowledge, but also the kind of strategic thinking and emotional resilience that she'd never imagined needing as a grocery store cashier in a small desert town. But as she looked at Sofia eating breakfast and discussing her school science project about rock formations, Maria felt a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. Her daughter deserved every opportunity that diamond wealth could provide, and Maria would not let sophisticated predators steal that future through manipulation and intimidation. The game had become more complex and dangerous than she'd anticipated, but the stakes made every challenge worthwhile. Somewhere beneath their modest property lay the key to generational security, and Maria Santos was prepared to fight for it with everything she had. The restraining order against Apex Resource Development was served on a Thursday morning, the same day that Maria received a visit from Special Agent Jennifer Walsh of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The federal agent arrived in an unmarked sedan, her credentials identifying her as part of a task force investigating mineral rights fraud across the Southwest. The timing felt ominous, as if Maria's attempts to protect her property had somehow attracted unwanted government attention. Mrs. Santos, I want to assure you that you're not under investigation, Agent Walsh began, settling into a chair at Maria's kitchen table while Sofia was safely at school. We're here because your situation intersects with a broader pattern of mineral rights exploitation that we've been tracking for over 2 years. Agent Walsh was a woman in her early 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of steady demeanor That suggested extensive experience dealing with complex financial crimes. She opened a laptop computer and showed Maria a map of the Southwest, marked with dozens of red pins, each representing a case where small property owners had been defrauded. Of valuable mineral rights, Apex Resource Development is one of several companies we're investigating for systematically targeting distressed property owners with valuable mineral deposits. Their tactics include unauthorized surveys, pressure sales techniques, and contracts designed to obscure the true value of mineral rights being acquired. Maria studied the map, recognizing several Arizona locations where she'd read about similar cases during her research. The pattern was extensive and sophisticated, suggesting a coordinated effort to identify and exploit vulnerable property owners. Across multiple states, what exactly are they doing that's illegal? Maria asked. Their tactics are unethical, but are they actually breaking laws? Agent Walsh pulled up files on her laptop, showing detailed evidence of Apex's operations. Trespassing for unauthorized surveys, filing false claims about property ownership, using fraudulent geological assessments to justify lowball offers, and in some cases, forging property owner signatures on mineral rights contracts. The documentation was extensive and disturbing. Maria saw evidence of systematic fraud that went far beyond aggressive business practices into outright criminal activity. Families had lost millions in potential wealth to contracts they'd never actually signed, surveys conducted without permission, and legal maneuvers designed to circumvent proper property rights procedures. Your case is particularly important because you've documented their tactics from the beginning, Agent Walsh continued. The unauthorized surveys on your property, the pressure tactics, the attempts to rush you into signing contracts, all of this provides evidence of their standard operating procedures. Maria felt a chill of realization. Her family's struggle with Apex wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a much larger criminal enterprise that had been systematically defrauding families across the region. The federal investigation meant that powerful forces were already mobilized against the companies trying to exploit her situation. What does this mean for my mineral rights situation? She asked. It means you have federal protection against the kind of manipulation Apex specializes in, but it also means your case is going to attract significant attention from multiple parties. When word gets out that the FBI is investigating mineral rights fraud using your property as a key example, every legitimate mining company in the region is going to want to establish relationships with you. Agent Walsh's prediction proved accurate within hours. By afternoon, Maria had received calls from 6 different mining companies, 3 law firms specializing in mineral rights, 2 geological consulting firms, and a reporter from the Phoenix Business Journal who somehow knew about the FBI investigation despite no public announcements. The attention was overwhelming and potentially dangerous. Each caller claimed to offer legitimate services or partnership opportunities, but Maria had no way to distinguish between honest business proposals and sophisticated attempts to exploit her situation. The federal investigation had provided protection against obvious fraud, while simultaneously making her a target for more subtle forms of manipulation. Patricia Hernandez called an emergency meeting for that evening, bringing additional legal experts who specialized in federal investigations and mineral rights partnerships. The attorney's office felt like a war room, with documents spread across multiple tables and laptops displaying complex legal strategies designed to protect Maria's interests, while the situation evolved rapidly around them. Mrs. Santos, the FBI, investigation changes everything about how we approach your mineral rights, Hernandez explained. On one hand, you have federal protection against fraudulent schemes. On the other hand, you're now at the center of a high-profile case that's going to attract both legitimate opportunities and sophisticated exploitation attempts. The legal team had identified 3 immediate priorities: establishing ironclad legal protections for Maria's mineral rights, vetting potential business partners with extraordinary care, and developing a media strategy that would control how information about her situation was presented to the public. The challenge is that legitimate mining companies are going to move quickly to establish relationships with you, knowing that your property represents one of the most promising diamond deposits discovered in Arizona in decades. But criminals and con artists are also going to intensify their efforts, using the federal investigation as cover for increasingly sophisticated fraud attempts. Dr. Reeves arrived at the meeting with updated geological assessments that made Maria's situation even more complex. Additional testing had revealed that the diamond deposits on her property were not only extensive, but of unusually high quality, with stones that could command premium prices in international markets. Mrs. Santos, I need to share some extraordinary news, Dr. Reeves began, opening a case that contained several rough diamonds larger than anything Maria had seen before. Deep core samples have revealed diamond deposits that exceed every estimate we've made to date. We're talking about stones of exceptional size and quality, deposits that could be worth over $100 million. The number was so large that Maria's mind struggled to process it meaningfully. $100 million represented wealth beyond anything she'd imagined possible, enough to transform not just her life, but the lives of generations of her family yet to be born. However, Dr. Reeves continued, deposits of this magnitude also attract attention from parties who operate far outside normal business ethics. We're talking about international criminal organizations, corrupt government officials, and companies that use violence and intimidation rather than legal contracts. Agent Walsh nodded grimly. Dr. Reeves is correct. Our investigation has revealed connections between some mineral rights fraud operations and organized crime networks that operate across international boundaries. When stakes reach this level, the risks become proportionally more serious. Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. She had wanted financial security for Sofia's future, but she was beginning to understand that extraordinary wealth came with extraordinary dangers that extended far beyond her experience or ability to handle alone. What kind of dangers are we talking about? She asked, dreading the answer. Agent Walsh's response was sobering. Kidnapping for ransom, property destruction to force sales, legal harassment designed to drain resources, and in extreme cases, physical violence against property owners who refuse to cooperate with acquisition attempts. The federal agent showed Maria case files from other high-value mineral discoveries, where property owners had faced systematic intimidation campaigns designed to force them into selling rights for fractions of their true value. The tactics ranged from financial harassment to direct threats against family members. Mrs. Santos, I want to be clear that these extreme measures are relatively rare, but when mineral deposits reach the potential value Dr. Reeves has identified on your property, the stakes justify extraordinary precautions. Patricia Hernandez outlined a comprehensive security plan that included legal protections, physical security measures, and communication protocols designed to ensure Maria and Sofia's safety while the mineral rights situation was resolved. The plan was extensive and expensive, requiring resources that Maria didn't possess independently. The good news is that several legitimate mining companies have already expressed interest in partnership arrangements that would include comprehensive security provisions, Hernandez explained. Companies like Southwestern Mining Consortium and Desert Gem Extraction have track records of successful partnerships with small property owners and the resources to provide protection during development phases. The meeting lasted until nearly midnight, with lawyers, federal agents, and geological experts developing strategies that seemed to belong in a thriller novel rather than Maria's actual life. By the time she drove home through the desert darkness, she felt simultaneously more protected and more vulnerable than when the day had begun. Sofia was staying overnight with Elena in Phoenix, a precautionary measure that Agent Walsh had recommended, until they could assess the full scope of potential threats. The empty trailer felt hollow and exposed, every shadow potentially concealing dangers that Maria was only beginning to understand. She spent the sleepless night reviewing security protocols and partnership proposals, trying to absorb information that would determine her family's future while struggling with the surreal nature of her situation. 6 months ago, her biggest worry had been making rent payments. Now, she was coordinating with federal agents and mining executives about deposits worth over $100 million. The next morning brought a development that crystallized both the opportunities and dangers of her situation. Maria woke to find a black SUV parked across from her property, its occupants using binoculars and telephoto lenses to observe her trailer and photograph the surrounding landscape. When she stepped onto her porch, one of the men lowered his window and called out to her, "Mrs. Santos, we represent International Mineral Acquisition. We're prepared to offer you $20 million cash for immediate sale of your mineral rights. No surveys, no delays, no conditions. Cash settlement within 72 hours. The offer was staggering, an amount that would solve every financial problem Maria had ever imagined and provide generational wealth for Sofia's family. But everything about the approach felt wrong. The unmarked vehicle, the surveillance of her property, the pressure for immediate decision-making, and the unwillingness to follow normal business procedures. "I'm not interested," Maria called back, trying to project confidence while her heart raced with anxiety. "Mrs. Santos, this is a limited-time offer. Market conditions are changing rapidly, and regulatory complications could make your mineral rights worthless if you wait too long to monetize them." The pressure tactics were more sophisticated than Apex's crude approach, but the underlying strategy was identical. Create artificial urgency to prevent careful consideration and consultation with experts. Maria recognized the manipulation techniques that Agent Walsh and Patricia Hernandez had warned her about. "You need to leave my property immediately, or I'm calling the FBI," she said, pulling out her phone to demonstrate her seriousness. The men in the SUV exchanged glances, then drove away without further argument. But their presence had demonstrated that word about her property's extraordinary value was spreading through networks that operated far beyond legitimate business channels. Maria called Agent Walsh immediately to report the incident. The federal agent's response was swift and decisive. "Mrs. Santos, we're implementing enhanced security protocols effective immediately. What you've described suggests that information about your mineral deposits has reached parties who operate outside normal legal boundaries." Within hours, Maria found herself at the center of a security operation that included federal protection, private security contractors, and legal teams working around the clock to finalize partnership agreements with legitimate mining companies, before criminal organizations could intensify their pressure campaigns. The transformation of her quiet desert life into something resembling a high-stakes thriller felt surreal and terrifying. But as she spoke with Sofia by phone that evening, hearing her daughter's excitement about the science fair project she was preparing, Maria felt a fierce determination that surprised her with its intensity. "Mummy, when are you coming to see my project? It's about how diamonds form under pressure, and I have all these cool diagrams and everything." "I'll be there tomorrow, Mija. Nothing is more important than supporting your education and your dreams." The conversation reminded Maria why she was enduring the stress and danger of her situation. Sofia deserved every opportunity that extraordinary wealth could provide, but more importantly, she deserved a mother who was brave enough to fight for her future regardless of the obstacles. As Maria prepared for another sleepless night of security concerns and legal strategies, she thought about Carlos's letter and his careful planning to protect their family's interests. He had anticipated the challenges she now faced and provided the foundation for navigating them successfully. The accidental discovery had become a complex battle involving federal investigations, international criminal enterprises, and mining operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But at its core, it remained a story about a mother determined to secure her daughter's future and honor her husband's legacy of methodical preparation and protective love. The stakes had escalated beyond anything Maria had imagined possible, but her commitment to protecting Sofia's interests remained absolute. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and intelligence that had carried her family through Carlos's death and the desperate months that followed. The diamond deposits beneath her property had been formed under extraordinary pressure over millions of years. Now Maria Santos was discovering that she could withstand extraordinary pressure herself when her daughter's future depended on her strength and determination. The story broke on Channel 12 News at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, 36 hours after Maria had signed preliminary partnership agreements with Southwestern Mining Consortium. The reporter, Amanda Rodriguez, stood in front of the Esperanza town limits sign with the desert landscape stretching behind her, delivering breaking news that would transform Maria's private struggle into a public spectacle. This is Amanda Rodriguez, reporting from Esperanza, Arizona, where a single mother's fight to keep her home has uncovered what geological experts are calling one of the most significant diamond discoveries in American history. Maria Santos, a grocery store cashier, raising her 8-year-old daughter alone, inherited 40 acres of what everyone believed was worthless desert land. But federal investigations have now revealed that her property sits atop diamond deposits potentially worth over $100 million. Maria watched the broadcast from a safe house in Tucson, her hands shaking as she realized that her face was being shown on television screens across Arizona and beyond. The reporter had somehow obtained her employee photo from Morales Market, footage of her trailer and property, and interviews with neighbors who described her as a hard-working single mother struggling to make ends meet. According to FBI sources, Santos became the target of an elaborate fraud scheme designed to steal her mineral rights for a fraction of their true value. Companies like Apex Resource Development allegedly used illegal tactics including trespassing, forged documents, and intimidation to force desperate property owners into signing away fortunes in mineral wealth. The news segment included aerial footage of her property, close-up shots of the rock formations where diamonds had been discovered, and interviews with geological experts who confirmed the extraordinary nature of the deposits. Dr. Reeves appeared on camera, carefully explaining the rarity of such discoveries while emphasizing the ongoing investigation into criminal exploitation of mineral rights. What makes this case particularly compelling, Rodriguez continued, is how it exposes systematic fraud targeting vulnerable families across the Southwest. Santos's courage in refusing to be intimidated by criminal organizations has provided federal investigators with evidence needed to prosecute a network of companies that have stolen tens of millions in mineral wealth from distressed property owners. Agent Walsh was shown leaving the federal courthouse, declining to comment on the ongoing investigation, but confirming that multiple arrests were expected as the case developed. The segment concluded with exterior shots of Southwestern Mining Consortium's headquarters and a brief interview with company executives who described their partnership with Maria as a model for ethical mineral development. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, Maria's phone began ringing incessantly. Reporters, documentary filmmakers, book publishers, and what seemed like every talk show producer in America wanted to interview the single mother who had discovered a fortune and fought off criminals to protect it. The attention was overwhelming and terrifying, transforming her into a public figure when all she had wanted was to provide security for Sofia. "Mom, you're famous," Sofia said, watching news coverage on her tablet from the safe house bedroom where she was supposedly doing homework. "Kids at school are going to see you on TV and everything." The realization that Sofia's classmates would know about their situation filled Maria with anxiety. She had tried to protect her daughter from the adult complexities of their mineral rights battle, but the media coverage made privacy impossible. Sofia was about to become the daughter of a woman who had discovered $100 million fortune, with all the attention and potential dangers that such notoriety would bring. Patricia Hernandez arrived at the safe house within an hour of the broadcast, her expression grim as she reviewed the media coverage and its potential implications for their legal strategy. "Mrs. Santos, this changes everything about how we manage your situation," the attorney began, spreading newspapers and printed internet articles across the safe house dining table. "Public knowledge of your mineral wealth creates new opportunities, but also exponentially increases the risks you're facing." The media coverage had already generated responses from parties Maria had never heard of. Environmental groups were demanding impact assessments before any mining operations began. Native American tribal councils were claiming ancestral rights to portions of her property. International mining conglomerates were making preliminary inquiries about acquisition possibilities that dwarfed previous offers. "More concerning," Hernandez continued, "are the communications we've received from parties who aren't identifying themselves clearly. Offshore investment firms, international mineral brokers, and what appear to be criminal organizations operating under legitimate business names." Agent Walsh joined them at the safe house that evening, bringing additional security personnel and sobering updates about how the media coverage was affecting the federal investigation. "Mrs. Santos, publicity of this magnitude attracts attention from criminal networks that operate internationally," the agent explained. "We're tracking inquiries about your situation from organizations based in Eastern Europe, South America, and Southeast Asia that specialize in acquiring mineral rights. Through intimidation and violence, the scope of potential threats had expanded beyond anything Maria had imagined possible. She was no longer just dealing with local companies using unethical business practices, but with international criminal enterprises that might view her family as obstacles to acquiring extraordinary mineral wealth." "What kind of protection can you provide?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady while Sofia played in the next room, apparently oblivious to the adult conversations determining their future safety. "Enhanced federal protection, relocation assistance if necessary, and coordination with international law enforcement agencies to monitor threats originating outside the United States," Agent Walsh replied. "But I need to be honest with you. This level of wealth attracts attention from parties that federal agencies sometimes struggle to control effectively." The conversation continued past midnight, with lawyers and federal agents developing contingency plans for scenarios that seemed increasingly removed from normal life. Witness protection programs, international safe houses, and legal strategies for managing mineral wealth under extraordinary security constraints were discussed as if they were routine considerations rather than measures typically reserved for organized crime witnesses. Maria went to bed that night in a secure facility surrounded by armed guards, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, while news vans maintained vigil outside their empty trailer 40 miles away. The transformation from struggling single mother to international figure of interest had happened so rapidly that she felt disconnected from her own life. The next morning brought developments that confirmed Agent Walsh's warnings about international tension. The safe house phone rang at dawn with a call from someone identifying himself as a representative of global mineral acquisition, speaking with a slight accent that suggested Eastern European origins. "Mrs. Santos, we represent parties who are prepared to offer you $50 million cash for immediate transfer of your mineral rights," the caller said. "This offer requires no surveys, no delays, no regulatory approvals. Simply sign, transfer documents and receive payment within 24 hours. The offer was staggering, half the estimated value of her mineral deposits, but still an amount that would provide extraordinary wealth for multiple generations of her family. But everything about the approach reinforced warnings she'd received about international criminal organizations that specialized in acquiring valuable assets through intimidation disguised as legitimate business transactions. "I'm not interested in selling my mineral rights," Maria replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Santos, you should understand that mineral development involves many risks and complications that can make theoretical wealth very difficult to realize. Our clients prefer to eliminate these uncertainties through immediate cash settlements that benefit all parties." The veiled threat was unmistakable, couched in business language, but clearly suggesting that refusing their offer could result in complications that would prevent her from benefiting from her mineral wealth through legitimate channels. "I said I'm not interested. Please don't call again." Maria ended the call and immediately contacted Agent Walsh, who traced the number to a telecommunications service that specialized in providing untraceable phone lines for international business transactions. The call had originated from a server farm in the Cayman Islands, routed through multiple countries to obscure its actual source. "This confirms our worst fears about international interest in your situation," Agent Walsh said during their emergency meeting later that morning. "Organizations with these capabilities don't typically accept refusal as a final answer." The federal agent outlined enhanced security protocols that would essentially require Maria and Sofia to live under protection until the mineral rights situation was resolved through legitimate channels. The measures were comprehensive but restrictive, limiting their freedom of movement and contact with the outside world. "How long would this protection last?" Maria asked, thinking about Sofia's education, her own employment, and the normal life they had been trying to preserve. "Potentially years, depending on how quickly we can finalize your mining partnerships and establish legal frameworks that make criminal acquisition impossible." The prospect of years in protective custody felt like a prison sentence, punishment, for the crime of inheriting valuable property and refusing to be intimidated into giving it away. Maria had fought to provide security for Sofia, but the result was threatening to deprive her daughter of normal childhood experiences and educational opportunities. That afternoon brought another media development that complicated their situation further. CNN had picked up the story, running a segment about mineral rights fraud that featured Maria's case as the primary example of criminal exploitation targeting vulnerable families. The national exposure generated even more attention from parties whose intentions were unclear. "Mom, why are all these people interested in our rocks?" Sofia asked during dinner at the safe house, her 8-year-old mind trying to process the adult complexities that had engulfed their lives. "Because the rocks are worth a lot of money, and some people will do bad things to try to take money that doesn't belong to them," Maria explained, trying to provide honest answers without frightening her daughter unnecessarily. "But the rocks are ours, right? Papi's grandmother found them, and Papi studied them, and now they belong to us?" The simplicity of Sofia's understanding cut through the legal and criminal complexities that had made Maria's situation seem overwhelmingly complicated. Her daughter was right. The diamonds belonged to their family through inheritance, discovery, and legal ownership. Everything else was just various parties trying to steal what rightfully belonged to Sofia's future. Yes, mija, they belong to us, and I'm going to make sure they stay ours, no matter what anyone else tries to do. That evening, Patricia Hernandez brought documents that would formalize Maria's partnership with Southwestern Mining Consortium, agreements that had been negotiated to protect her family's long-term interests while providing immediate security against criminal acquisition attempts. These contracts establish you as primary owner of all mineral rights, while giving Southwestern the expertise and resources to develop the deposits safely and profitably, Hernandez explained. You'll receive 60% of all profits from diamond extraction, with guaranteed minimum payments that ensure financial security regardless of mining complications. The partnership terms were more favorable than anything Maria had imagined possible, providing both immediate income and long-term wealth, while transferring the risks and complexities of mineral extraction to experienced professionals. More importantly, Hernandez continued, Southwestern has the security resources and international connections to protect your interests against the kind of criminal pressure you're now facing. They've dealt with similar situations in other countries and understand how to operate in environments where extraordinary wealth attracts dangerous attention. Signing the partnership agreements felt like crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Maria was committing her family's future to relationships and strategies that extended far beyond her understanding or control, trusting experts and institutions to protect interests that she had only recently discovered existed. But as she watched Sofia working on homework at the safe house table, completely absorbed in a science project about geological formations, Maria felt confident that she was making decisions that honored both Carlos's legacy and her daughter's potential. The media circus would continue, the criminal pressures would require ongoing vigilance, and the mineral development would take years to generate the wealth that existed in theoretical form beneath their desert property. But Maria had survived the discovery phase, protected her family's rights against sophisticated exploitation, and established partnerships that would transform Sofia's life in ways that justified every risk and challenge they had endured. The accidental discovery had become a public spectacle, but it remained fundamentally a story about a mother's determination to secure her daughter's future and honor her husband's careful planning to protect their family's interests. The stakes had grown beyond anything Maria had imagined possible, but her commitment to those fundamental principles remained absolute. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new complexities that would test her resolve and intelligence. But tonight, in a secure facility surrounded by federal protection, Maria Santos felt something she hadn't experienced since Carlos died. Absolute confidence that Sofia's future was secure, regardless of what obstacles lay ahead. 6 months after signing the partnership agreements with Southwestern Mining Consortium, Maria faced a choice that would define not just her family's future, but potentially the future of mineral rights law across the United States. Standing in the marble-floored lobby of the Russell Senate Office Building in Washington, D.C., holding Sofia's hand, while photographers captured their arrival, she felt the weight of representing thousands of families who had been exploited by predatory mineral acquisition schemes. The Senate Subcommittee on Energy and Natural Resources had invited her to testify about systematic fraud in the mineral rights industry, using her case as the centerpiece of proposed legislation that would protect small property owners from the kind of exploitation she had narrowly escaped. The invitation represented an opportunity to transform her personal struggle into lasting change, but it also meant exposing her family to even greater public scrutiny and potential retaliation from criminal organizations that preferred operating in shadows. Senator Patricia Morrison, the subcommittee chair, had been unambiguous about the stakes involved in Maria's testimony. Mrs. Santos, your case has provided us with documentation of criminal practices that extend across state lines and international boundaries. Your willingness to testify could lead to legislation that protects thousands of families from losing generational wealth to sophisticated fraud schemes. But Maria's decision to testify hadn't been made lightly. The past 6 months had tested her family's resilience in ways she was still processing. The mining partnership was generating substantial income. Her first quarterly payment had been $2.3 million, with projections suggesting annual revenues that would make her one of the wealthiest individuals in Arizona. But wealth had brought complications that no amount of money could solve. Sofia was now enrolled in a private school in Scottsdale under an assumed name, her education continuing under the protection of security personnel who monitored every aspect of her daily routine. The normal childhood experiences that Maria had wanted to preserve, playground friendships, school activities, casual family outings, had become impossible due to kidnapping threats from international criminal organizations that viewed Sofia as leverage for forcing Maria to transfer her mineral rights. "Mom, will I ever be able to use my real name again?" Sofia had asked the previous evening as they reviewed her congressional testimony in their secure Washington hotel suite. At 9 years old, she had developed an adult understanding of security, protocols and threat assessments that no child should need to possess. "I don't know, Mija," Maria had answered honestly, "but I'm hoping that speaking to Congress will help change laws so that other families don't have to go through what we've experienced." The hearing room was packed with journalists, mining industry representatives, law enforcement officials, and families whose mineral rights had been stolen through schemes similar to those that had targeted Maria. She recognized several faces. From news coverage of related cases, ranchers from Wyoming who had lost uranium rights worth millions, farmers from North Dakota whose oil deposits had been acquired through forged contracts, Native American families whose tribal lands had been stripped of valuable minerals through fraudulent legal maneuvers. Senator Morrison called the hearing to order with a statement that captured the scope of criminal activity that Maria's case had helped expose. This subcommittee has documented systematic fraud that has stolen over $400 million in mineral wealth from American families during the past 5 years. Today's testimony will examine how criminal organizations exploit legal loopholes and target vulnerable property owners to acquire valuable resources for fractions of their true worth. Maria's testimony began with her personal story, the foreclosure notice, the geological survey, the discovery of diamond deposits, and the immediate targeting by companies that used intimidation and fraud to acquire mineral rights. But it expanded to address the broader implications of predatory mineral acquisition and the need for federal protections. Senators, my family's situation demonstrates how current laws fail to protect ordinary Americans from sophisticated exploitation. When I inherited 40 acres of desert land, I had no idea it contained millions of dollars in diamonds. But criminal organizations had systems in place to identify such properties, target distressed owners, and steal valuable resources using techniques that bordered on legal, but were fundamentally fraudulent. She described the unauthorized surveys, the pressure tactics, the forged documents, and the international criminal networks that had threatened her family when she refused to sell her rights for exploitative payments. Her testimony was supported by FBI evidence, geological assessments, and documentation provided by Patricia Hernandez showing how predatory companies operated across multiple states. The most disturbing aspect of these schemes, Maria continued, is how they specifically target families in financial distress. Companies like Apex Resource Development monitor foreclosure filings, medical bankruptcies, and other indicators of economic vulnerability. then approach desperate families with offers that seem generous but represent tiny fractions of actual mineral wealth. Senator James Crawford, the ranking minority member, questioned whether federal intervention was necessary in what appeared to be state-level property rights issues. His questions suggested skepticism about expanding federal authority over mineral rights law, concerns that reflected broader political tensions about government regulation of private industry. Mrs. Santos, isn't it possible that these companies are simply making legitimate business offers to property owners who are free to accept or decline? Market negotiations naturally involve parties with different levels of information and expertise. Maria's response drew on months of preparation with congressional liaisons and legal experts who had helped her understand the political complexities of mineral rights legislation. Senator Crawford, there's an important difference between legitimate business negotiation and systematic fraud. When companies trespass on private property to conduct unauthorized surveys, forge geological assessments to justify lowball offers, and threaten property owners who refuse to cooperate, they're not engaging in normal market activities. They're committing crimes. She presented evidence that Agent Walsh had helped compile, showing how predatory mineral acquisition schemes met legal definitions of racketeering, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The documentation revealed networks of companies that coordinated their activities across state lines, shared information about vulnerable property owners, and used threats and intimidation to force transactions that legitimate businesses would never consider. Moreover, Maria continued, the victims of these schemes are rarely sophisticated investors who understand mineral rights law. Their families facing foreclosure, medical bankruptcies, or other financial crises that make them desperate for immediate cash. Criminal organizations exploit this desperation by creating artificial urgency and preventing careful consideration of offers that transfer millions in potential wealth for thousands in immediate payment. The afternoon session focused on proposed legislation that would address the legal loopholes that predatory companies exploited. The Mineral Rights Protection Act would establish federal standards for mineral rights transactions, require geological surveys to be conducted by licensed professionals, mandate waiting periods for property owners to consult with independent experts, and create severe penalties for companies that used fraud or intimidation to acquire mineral rights. Senator Morrison outlined the bill's key provisions while addressing concerns about federal overreach raised by industry representatives. This legislation doesn't prevent legitimate mineral development or interfere with fair market transactions. It simply ensures that property owners have access to accurate information and adequate time to make informed decisions about selling valuable resources. Mining industry lobbyists argued that additional regulations would increase costs and delay development of important mineral resources, potentially making American companies less competitive in global markets. Their testimony emphasized the economic benefits of streamlined mineral acquisition processes and warned about unintended consequences of federal intervention in state property rights issues. But Maria's testimony had been prepared to address exactly these concerns. Working with economists and policy experts, she had developed arguments that showed how predatory acquisition schemes actually harmed the mining industry by creating public distrust and political opposition to legitimate mineral development. Senators, protecting property owners from fraud strengthens rather than weakens the mining industry, she argued. When families like mine fight back against criminal exploitation, we generate negative publicity that damages the reputation of all mineral extraction companies. Honest businesses should welcome regulations that distinguish them from criminal organizations and restore public confidence in mineral development. Her testimony concluded with a personal appeal that captured the human stakes involved in mineral rights legislation. My daughter, Sofia, will grow up with opportunities that seemed impossible when I was struggling to pay our mortgage and facing foreclosure. But she's also growing up under security protection because criminal organizations tried to steal her inheritance through fraud and intimidation. No American family should have to choose between financial security and physical safety. The Mineral Rights Protection Act would ensure that future families can benefit from mineral discoveries without becoming targets for sophisticated criminal exploitation. The applause that followed her testimony included family members whose own mineral rights had been stolen, law enforcement officials who had worked on related cases, and senators from both parties who recognized the bipartisan appeal of protecting vulnerable families from criminal exploitation. But the most meaningful response came from Sofia, who had been seated in the hearing room gallery and approached the witness table after Maria finished testifying. "Mom, I'm proud of you for standing up to the bad guys and helping other families," she said quietly, her words carrying more weight than any congressional commendation. The aftermath of Maria's testimony was swift and significant. Within weeks, the Mineral Rights Protection Act had gained bipartisan support and was moving through Congress with unusual speed. Media coverage focused on the human dimensions of mineral rights fraud while building public pressure for federal action to protect vulnerable property owners. More importantly for Maria's family, her congressional testimony had achieved something that months of federal protection and security measures hadn't accomplished. It had made her too visible and politically significant for criminal organizations to target safely. Threatening or harming someone who had become the face of congressional anti-fraud legislation would generate law enforcement attention that even international criminal networks wanted to avoid. Agent Walsh confirmed this assessment during their post-testimony debriefing in Washington. "Mrs. Santos, your public profile has actually become a form of protection. You're now too well known and politically connected for criminal organizations to risk direct action against your family." The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Publicity that had initially increased her family's danger had ultimately provided the security that federal protection alone couldn't guarantee. By choosing to fight back publicly against criminal exploitation, she had transformed herself from a vulnerable target into someone whose safety was protected by political necessity. The flight back to Arizona felt different than any trip Maria had taken since discovering the diamond deposits. For the first time in months, she and Sofia traveled without security escorts, flew under their real names, and planned to return to something approaching normal life. The mining partnership was generating wealth that exceeded even Dr. Reeves's most optimistic projections. But more importantly, they had helped create legal protections that would benefit thousands of families facing similar exploitation. "Mom, when we get home, can we visit Bisabuela's grave?" Sofia asked as their plane descended toward Phoenix. "I want to tell her about the diamonds and how they're helping people." The request touched Maria's heart. Carlos's grandmother had died, without knowing that her rock collection represented clues to extraordinary mineral wealth, but her intuitive understanding of their property's geological significance had provided the foundation for everything that followed. "Of course, mija, and we'll tell her about how Papi's careful planning protected us and how we used what we discovered to help other families." As they drove through the familiar desert landscape toward Esperanza, Maria reflected on the transformation that had occurred since that morning when the foreclosure notice and geological survey had arrived in the same mail delivery. The struggling single mother who had desperately needed $500 to keep her electricity on had become a multi-millionaire whose congressional testimony would shape federal policy for decades. But the most important transformation had been internal. The discovery that she possessed reserves of courage, intelligence, and determination that she had never imagined. The pressure that had threatened to crush her family had instead compressed her character into something harder and more valuable than the diamonds beneath their desert property. Sofia fell asleep against her shoulder as they drove through the darkness, finally safe enough to let down her guard and trust that tomorrow would bring opportunities rather than threats. Maria listened to her daughter's peaceful breathing and felt the profound satisfaction that came from knowing she had honored Carlos's legacy while securing Sofia's future in ways that extended far beyond financial wealth. The accidental discovery had become intentional action. Personal struggle had become public service, and a mother's determination to protect her child had transformed into legislation that would protect thousands of families from the kind of exploitation that had threatened their own future. The moral choice had been made, not once but repeatedly, in congressional hearing rooms and hotel safe houses through months of danger and uncertainty that had tested every aspect of Maria's character. She had chosen truth over safety, transparency over secrecy, and the welfare of other families over her own immediate comfort. The diamonds beneath their property would continue generating wealth for generations, but the most valuable treasure had been the discovery of her own strength and the knowledge that ordinary people could still make extraordinary differences when they chose courage over comfort and service over self-preservation. 3 years later, Maria Santos stood at the podium of the newly constructed Santos Center for Mineral Rights Education, a gleaming facility built on the outskirts of Esperanza with funds from her mining partnership. The center provided free legal assistance to families facing mineral rights exploitation, while also serving as a training ground for the next generation of ethical geologists and mining engineers. Sofia, now 12, and already showing signs of her father's analytical mind, had helped design the center's interactive exhibits that taught visitors about both geological processes and property rights protection. The occasion was the annual Mineral Rights Protection Symposium, an event that had grown from a small gathering of affected families into an international conference attended by legislators, law enforcement officials, mining executives, and advocacy groups from around the world. Maria's keynote address would focus on the broader implications of their struggle and the ongoing need for vigilance against exploitation. 5 years ago, I was a grocery store cashier, facing foreclosure on a trailer that sat on supposedly worthless desert land, Maria began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. Today, that land has generated over $40 million in diamond revenue, funded this education center, and helped create federal legislation that has protected hundreds of families from mineral rights fraud. She paused, scanning the audience. That included Senator Morrison, Agent Walsh, Dr. Reeves, and Patricia Hernandez, the coalition of experts whose collaboration had transformed her personal crisis into systemic change. But the most important transformation hasn't been financial. It's been the discovery that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept exploitation as inevitable. The statistics she presented were remarkable. The Mineral Rights Protection Act had prevented an estimated $2.3 billion in fraudulent mineral acquisitions during its first 3 years of implementation. Criminal prosecutions had dismantled 7 major fraud networks, with companies like Apex Resource Development facing federal racketeering charges that had resulted in prison sentences for their executives. International cooperation had disrupted criminal organizations that had operated across multiple countries, stealing mineral wealth from vulnerable families worldwide. But numbers only tell part of the story, Maria continued. The real victory is that families like mine no longer have to face sophisticated criminal exploitation alone. The Santos Center has provided free legal representation to over 400 families, helping them navigate mineral rights law and avoid predatory contracts that would have stolen their generational wealth. She gestured toward Sofia, who was seated in the front row with a group of students from the center's summer science program. My daughter will inherit not just the financial benefits of our mineral discovery, but also the knowledge that her family used their good fortune to protect others facing similar challenges. That's the legacy that matters most. The presentation included video testimonials from families who had been protected by the legislation Maria's testimony had helped enact. A ranching family from Montana, whose uranium rights had been valued at $15 million instead of the $50,000 they'd been offered. A Native American community in New Mexico, whose tribal lands had been protected from fraudulent mineral claims. A widow in Nevada, whose late husband's copper deposits had provided college funds for her 3 children rather than enriching criminal organizations. Each story reinforced the same theme. When communities work together to protect vulnerable members, everyone benefits from increased transparency and accountability. The mining industry itself had evolved, with legitimate companies embracing higher standards that distinguished them from criminal operations and restored public trust in mineral development. Dr. Reeves presented updated geological surveys showing that the diamond deposits on Maria's property were even more extensive than originally estimated, with new formations discovered that could generate revenue for decades. But he emphasized that the scientific value of their discovery extended beyond commercial applications. The Santos property has become a teaching laboratory where students learn both geological principles and ethical business practices, he explained. Universities send graduate students here to study not just diamond formation, but also the social and legal frameworks necessary for responsible mineral development. Agent Walsh provided updates on ongoing investigations that had grown from the original mineral rights fraud cases. International law enforcement cooperation had expanded to address related crimes, including money laundering, environmental destruction, and human trafficking networks that had used mineral acquisition schemes as cover for broader criminal activities. Mrs. Santos's courage in standing up to criminal exploitation has created ripple effects that extend far beyond mineral rights law, Agent Walsh noted. Her testimony helped expose international criminal networks that were operating in multiple industries, leading to prosecutions that have dismantled organizations responsible for billions in fraudulent activities. But the most compelling testimony came from Sofia herself, who had requested permission to address the symposium as a representative of the next generation of mineral rights advocates. At 12, she possessed a sophisticated understanding of both geological processes and legal protections that reflected her unique upbringing. My dad died when I was 5, but he left us something more valuable than the diamonds under our land, Sofia said, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. He left us the knowledge that education and careful planning can protect families from people who try to take advantage of desperate situations. She described her own education at the Santos Center, where she had learned not just about geology and mining, but about ethics, community responsibility, and the importance of using privilege to protect those who lacked similar advantages. I know I'm lucky to have opportunities that most kids don't get, but I also know that luck comes with responsibility. When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer like Ms. Hernandez, helping families protect their mineral rights and making sure that what happened to us helps other people, instead of just making us rich. The applause that followed Sofia's remarks was thunderous, but Maria felt the most profound satisfaction from watching her daughter articulate values that honored Carlos's memory while embracing the responsibilities that came with extraordinary good fortune. The symposium concluded with the announcement of the Santos Scholarship Program, which would provide full college funding for students from families affected by mineral rights exploitation. The scholarships would emphasize education in geology, law, engineering, and public policy, fields that would enable recipients to continue the work of protecting vulnerable communities from sophisticated exploitation. This program ensures that our mineral discovery continues benefiting families for generations, Maria explained. Education is the most powerful tool for preventing exploitation, and these scholarships will create a network of advocates who understand both the technical and legal aspects of mineral rights protection. As the audience filed out of the auditorium, Maria reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her family from desperate poverty to extraordinary wealth and influence. The foreclosure notice that had arrived with the Geological Survey now seemed like the beginning of an adventure rather than the threat of disaster it had appeared at the time. But the most meaningful transformation hadn't been financial. It had been the discovery that personal struggles could become public service, that individual courage could create systemic change, and that the true value of unexpected good fortune lay in using it to protect others facing similar challenges. Sofia joined her mother on the stage, looking out at the center that bore their family name and housed programs that would help thousands of families navigate the complex world of mineral rights. "Mom, do you think Papi would be proud of what we've done?" she asked quietly. Maria pulled her daughter close, thinking about Carlos's methodical approach to protecting their family's interests and his careful planning that had made everything possible. "I think he'd be amazed by how far we've come, but not surprised. He always believed that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, eventually leads to the best outcomes." As they walked through the center's exhibits, past displays that told the story of their discovery and the legal protections it had inspired, Maria felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing they had transformed a personal crisis into lasting change that would benefit thousands of families for generations to come. The diamonds beneath their desert property would continue generating wealth, but the most valuable treasure had been the knowledge that ordinary people could create extraordinary change when they chose courage over comfort, service over self-interest, and transparency over secrecy. Their story had become a beacon of hope for families facing similar exploitation, proof that justice could prevail over criminal manipulation when communities worked together to protect their most vulnerable members. If this incredible journey from desperation to triumph has inspired you, we'd love to hear where you're watching from in the comments below. Maria and Sofia's courage in standing up to criminal exploitation shows us that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss stories of real people overcoming impossible odds and transforming their struggles into hope for others. Tomorrow, we have another remarkable story about someone who discovered that their biggest challenges became their greatest opportunities. You won't want to miss it.